Once again, let's begin with the numbers. According to the United Nations Office of Drug Control, UNODC, approximately 70,000 hectares of opium poppy were cultivated in 2002. The UNODC's 2010 report estimated production at 90,000 hectares. In 2009, UNODC estimated the total value of exported heroin to be $3.4 billion, approximately one-third of the nation's total GDP. Afghanistan remains the supplier of 90% of the world's opium. But the Afghan government and international partners have spent billions of dollars in counter-narcotics efforts over the past decade. Why haven't the numbers changed? Adam Payne is a rural development expert at the Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit, an independent think tank based in Kabul. According to him, the foremost problem is there simply has not been a unified effort.
It's very difficult to talk of an international effort. There has been conflict between the American position and the British position as the two key external agents in counter-narcotics. But then you have had enormous divisions within the Americans between the military, the security people, USAID, your drugs administration. They have not all seen things in the same way.
Payne says the U.S. military has been willing to support opium producers in achieving military objectives.
The U.S. military, on the other hand, have been working actively with key traders in narcotics as part of the military effort, which of course is contrary to any sort of counter-narcotic and interdiction efforts. And there's been this muddle in terms of what's the priorities, what's the goals.
For the past decade, Afghan governmental and international counter-narcotic efforts have focused on eradication. Eradication is the physical destruction of poppy plants by government forces. Paul Fishstein, agricultural expert and Harvard University Belfer Center fellow, says that the biggest drawback is simply its inconsistent and politicized application.
So it becomes a political issue where eradicators will go out and actually eradicate opium that's either from people who, are out of favor, who or otherwise don't have the political clout to be able to avoid eradication.
Gretchen Peters, an investigative reporter with a decade of experience in Afghanistan, agrees and suggests that corruption plays a major part in the eradication program.
The problem with the program was that it was quite corrupt, and so the local officials who were helping to decide which fields would get cut down would be paid off by wealthy farmers, and then they would end up destroying the fields of the poorest of the poor. And this ended up just driving hundreds, if not thousands, of farm families into the arms of the insurgency.
Eradication targeting the poor empowers the Taliban to create their own narrative of the counter-narcotics efforts. Fishstein illustrates the Taliban's propaganda victory.
There's ample evidence in a number of places that the Taliban have tried to capitalize on this by portraying themselves as the defenders of the local poor, downtrodden farmers. Look, the government is at the instigation of the international community, is here to destroy your crop, but will help you out.
But why doesn't the government simply eradicate the entire opium crop through a total airborne eradication program? Fishstein explains the idea's impracticality.
The main concern or argument against that is, again, the counter-reaction that it provokes. I don't know what the current estimate of opium's contribution to the Afghan economy, but at some point it was estimated to be up to a half, 40%, 30%. Certainly if you look at the economic dislocations we've had in this country, if you imagine that instead of that we had taken a 20 to 40% hit on the economy, you can imagine the magnitude of the reaction.
The other major counter-narcotics effort is the development of alternative livelihoods. This practice creates alternative and legal income sources for opium farmers. Fishstein outlines the basis of the idea.
Alternative livelihood emerged. It's kind of the new generation of what started out, maybe decades ago in so-called crop substitution. The idea that you would take one crop that was similar value to an illicit crop, and then just farmers would substitute one for the other.
Joel Haffenstein, a former USAID contractor, offers the example of the Afghan wheat crop, where foreign donors offered free inputs to boost profitability.
Been used very extensively to try to just create a sort of single season push in which lots of farmers will plant wheat, so handing out lots of wheat seed and fertilizer, even though they know there's no way that would have an impact beyond a single season. And then you dump large amounts of wheat seed and fertilizer onto the markets. You're actually disrupting the input markets that are run for profit and that we're trying to support for the long term.
This short-sightedness, Fishstein argues, is the result of not placing opium in its rural context.
We also often treat it as just a question of let's substitute crops of similar value. This focus on whether crop X, whether it's, saffron or white cumin, can provide an alternative. So there's a look for those simple solutions. But I think for opium, you really have to look at the rural economy as a whole. Opium is a very significant crop, part of an entire rural economy.
But Payne suggests that the concentration of developmental efforts in poppy-producing provinces actually encourages provinces to cultivate.
All sorts of perverse incentives have been introduced, whereby those areas which are most insecure and growing most opium have usually been rewarded by higher development and intervention efforts. And those provinces that have not growing opium or are more secure have received less. And of course, they have seen that. The incentive, therefore, is for areas which are not growing it to move back in so that they can get aid too.
Peters believes alternative livelihoods will need to be a part of any successful counter-narcotics strategy, but with other support as well.
It makes sense to have a more balanced strategy that focuses on interdiction, on public education, and on alternative livelihoods to try and help shift the communities and to be part of the solution for them to get away from the drug trade, as opposed to someone that's bringing more pain and more economic trouble into their communities.
Ultimately, Payne states, the opium economy should be understood as a result rather than a cause.
I think opium cultivation, as I said, is a symptom. It's a symptom of poverty. It's a symptom of state failure. And therefore, firstly, one has got to take a very long-term view of this. I mean, you think of Thailand, which had a much smaller drug problem, much smaller opium cultivation in the 1960s. And they took 25 years to reduce it, basically by investing heavily long-term in infrastructure, support development to bring people into the state. If it took that long for a relatively effective and capable state, you can imagine how long it's going to take in Afghanistan.
With this long view, Payne sums up the past decade of counter-narcotic efforts.
We've tried to do the wrong things too quickly in the expectation that there were quick solutions to this. They're not. The lasting solution is building an effective state that provides security and welfare.
For War News Radio, I'm Alan Zhao.